Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a highly dynamic, fast-moving tour through the famously complex, but honestly, absolutely fascinating landscape of Ludwig Wittgenstein's later philosophy. If you've ever found yourself totally tangled up in words, or kind of wondering if the people around you are even speaking the same language, well, you're in exactly the right place.
Our main source for this visual journey is the Routledge text Wittgenstein Key Concepts. Now, as we move through these ideas, I want you to keep one big overarching theme in mind. Wittgenstein is famous for having two very distinct philosophical phases, and shifting our perspective from his early, super strict logic to his later, everyday realism. It's not just some dry academic exercise. It literally changes how we understand human language and human behavior. It's a complete paradigm shift.
Here is the six-part roadmap we'll be continuously moving through today. First, the problem of meaning. Second, meaning is just use. Third, playing language games. Fourth, the family resemblance. Fifth, the rule-following paradox. And finally, philosophy as therapy.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1, the problem of meaning, or what Wittgenstein called the Augustinian picture.
So we need to start by looking at an incredibly intuitive trap that, honestly, almost all of us fall into when we think about how we learn to speak. In his Confessions, Augustine writes, "When they named some object, I grasped that the thing was called by the sound they uttered when they meant to point it out." Wittgenstein points out that this sets up a deeply flawed Augustinian picture of language. It's this deeply ingrained idea that every single word just names an object. Like you point to a table, you say table, and boom, that's it. That's the whole essence of language. But Wittgenstein eventually realized this picture is dangerously incomplete. And to really grasp why it's so incomplete, we have to look at the massive clash of ideas that actually happened within Wittgenstein's own life. The early Wittgenstein, the guy who wrote the Tractatus, totally believed that language was a strict, logical picture of reality. He thought words corresponded directly to facts. But the late Wittgenstein, the one who wrote Philosophical Investigations, had this massive revelation. He realized that language is absolutely not some crystalline logical structure. Nope. It's an everyday messy tool. To actually understand words, we have to return them to their everyday ordinary use. Which brings us to Section 2, meaning is just use, where we completely break that illusion. So the absolutely crucial point here is meaning as use. The meaning of a word is not an object it stands for, but rather its use in the language. Words are active instruments, right? There are tools in a toolbox. If I hand you a hammer, its meaning is what you actually do with it, not some label pasted on the side of the handle. Language isn't a static museum of labels. It is a bustling, active workshop. Moving right along to Section 3, playing language games. Let's look at the builders. To really lock this concept in, Wittgenstein gives us this famous thought experiment. Imagine a primitive construction site. Builder A shouts, "block," and helper B immediately brings a block. Then A shouts, "pillar," then "slab." This primitive language game shows words functioning directly as practical actions. When the builder shouts "slab," he isn't giving some deep metaphysical description of a piece of stone. He's making a move in a shared activity. The entire meaning of slab is the action of bringing the slab.
Now, what's really interesting here is how we define a language game. It's an activity interwoven with words, where speaking is part of an action or a form of life. Think about a chessboard. You can't possibly understand the pieces of language until you know how to play the specific game they belong to. The word water means one thing when you're dying of thirst in a desert, and it means something totally different when you're a plumber trying to fix a leak in a basement. The game itself is what gives the word its life.
Now, let's shift into Section 4, the family resemblance. Let's talk about those crisscrossing networks. Consider this question for a second. What do all games have in common? Seriously, I'm playfully challenging you right now. Try to think of a single defining feature for absolutely everything we call a game. Let's actually test that out. Board games, card games, ball games, Olympic games, tic-tac-toe, chase and tag. Do they all have boards? No. Do they all have balls? Definitely not. Are they all competitive? Well, what about a kid just repeatedly throwing a ball against the wall for fun? Wittgenstein proves here that there is absolutely no single common feature, no magical thread that connects them all. That pure essence we're looking for, it just doesn't exist. So how do we know what a game is? Well, it's because of family resemblance. It's this complicated network of similarities that overlap and crisscross, very much like the resemblances between members of a human family. You might have your mother's eyes, and your brother might have her nose. There's no one single family trait that every single person shares. It's just an overlapping web. And concepts like game survive beautifully on this web without needing strict, rigid boundaries. We understand them in practice, not through some mathematical formula.
Let's keep moving. Section 5, the rule-following paradox.
This brings us to a really dizzying question about how we can ever successfully follow a rule. Wittgenstein says any interpretation still hangs in the air along with what it interprets and cannot give it any support. This is actually a pretty terrifying philosophical realization when you think about it. Imagine a signpost pointing left. How do you actually know to go the direction the finger points and not the opposite way? If you say, well, I have a mental rule that tells me, okay, but how do you interpret that mental rule? Rules don't just magically self-apply in our minds before we act. Any interpretation requires another rule, which just leads to an endless, infinite regress.
So how on earth do we actually communicate? Well, we obey the rule blindly. Rule following isn't some mysterious, hidden, inner mental process. It's an outward, shared custom. It's a practice. We don't sit there consciously interpreting the fundamental rules of language at every single step. We just do it, based on the training we've received in our shared form of life. We are grounded by our shared human activities.
And that takes us to our final stop, Section 6, Philosophy as Therapy.
So what are we supposed to do with all these mind-bending revelations about everyday language? If we can't find strict definitions, what's the point of philosophy? Well, Wittgenstein famously said, philosophy is a battle against the bewitchment of our intelligence by means of language. He firmly believed that philosophy shouldn't be about building these grand, rigid, overarching theories of the universe. Instead, it has to act as a kind of therapy, something to untangle us from the invisible traps our own words set for us.
And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate goal here, a total shift in perspective. On one hand, you have the metaphysical use. That's when we demand strict definitions and search for hidden essences. That is language on vacation, and it just creates endless philosophical confusion. But on the other hand, you have everyday use, which means looking at how words naturally live and work in the real world. Wittgenstein's therapeutic method is all about bringing words back from their abstract metaphysical vacations, right back to their humble, original homes in our daily actions. I want to leave you with a lingering question to think about as we wrap up. Tomorrow, when you speak, will you look for the hidden essence of your words, or will you pay attention to the game you are playing? We are constantly moving between different forms of life, adopting different rules, and grabbing different tools from our linguistic toolbox. So the next time you find yourself stuck in a frustrating argument over what a word truly means, maybe just ask yourself, what is the use of this word in the game we're playing right now? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep observing those language games, and I'll catch you on the next one.